Thank you, Madam President, members. It's been an interesting and robust discussion, and evidently not concluded yet, as I know there'll be more speaking on it. But I thought I would try to address some of the issues that have been percolating around in my head. You know, we try to sanitize it some by calling assisted suicide or death with dignity or compassionate. You know, we throw a lot of terms out. You know, I heard aid in dying. Reality is, this is aid in killing. We had another term that was used out there, which was called healthcare professionals. Yet, what we're asking them to do is prescribe death. How is that a healthcare professional? Definitions matter, and certainly it is a way we try to sanitize the discussion to make something that by society for millennia has been something we don't really want to soft pedal. And we change the terms to try to make it more dignified. There's nothing dignified about dying. As has been said, we all do it. It's the last chapter of life. We're all born, we all die. The matter is, how? And that's really kind of what we're deciding here, and whether we can accelerate that process. You know, there's been some talk about CMA being neutral on this. And certainly, an organization that's 40,000 plus, with a decision made by 41, doesn't represent the desires of everybody in there. And certainly the AMA, which is the largest organization, medical organization, I can find my notes here, have made comments about this. And they have approximately 225,000. Physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with a physician's role as healer. Would be difficult or impossible to control, would pose serious societal risks. Instead of participating in assisted suicide, physicians must aggressively respond to the needs of patients at the end of life. Patients should not be abandoned once it's determined that cure is impossible. Multidisciplinary interventions should be sought, including specialty consultations, hospice care, pastoral counseling, and so on. And so that's the AMA. Another chapter out of history is that when this landmark bill was adopted, legislation was adopted in Oregon, the Oregon Medical Association was also on the sidelines. And yet, 3 years later, they attempted to reverse themselves because the physicians who were in charge of making this tough medical decision found it a little more difficult when it was reality than when it was theory. And so they sought unsuccessfully to change that because now they became the merchants of death, not the healthcare providers. And so it'll be interesting to see if we pass this today or we pass this year through this process, whether our own CMA, who are now sidelined, come back and try to undo what they did by their silence. Certainly the oncologists are not silent. I have a flyer from the Association of Northern California Oncologists and the Medical Oncology Association of Southern California. And these are the doctors that deal with dying more than anybody. They're the cancer doctors. They deal with this on a regular basis. They're the ones that have to come in to the patient, to the family, and explain that they have glioblastoma or some other terminal illness. Nobody wants to hear that. And we've heard a lot of comment about how people take that, but it's never taken good. You don't sit and rejoice, wow, I've got the good one. You know, it's depressing. And in fact, we've heard today that pain is one reason that people cite for wanting to terminate their life. They fear what it's going to be like, much like you wouldn't want to go out by fire, or for me, drowning is particularly repugnant. But how we die elicits different kind of fears depending what the method is. But when Oregon did their presentation of data in 2014, pain was not a top of the list. It was really about 25% of the physicians attending said that 25% was pain, but 91.5% said that loss of autonomy. You know, they couldn't do what they used to do. 88.7%, decreasing ability to participate in activities that made life enjoyable. 79%, loss of dignity. Yeah, dying You lose a lot of dignity there. 50% loss of control of bodily functions. Burden on family was mentioned once before, 40%. These are all serious issues, but pain was 25%. But there was the palliative care people, and I have a quote here somewhere, I won't bother to read it, but he said that he specializes in this, and he talked about how in all of his years of experience, he's never had a patient who he could not ameliorate their pain. And we had the pharmacist from Temecula detail that we do indeed, through modern science, have some amazing ways to take pain out of the equation, and those that specialize in it certainly have that available. And so, you know, this is a difficult discussion. It's something we don't want to enter into lightly. Yeah, there's a choice for people, and that's what you're giving them, but is it a choice that's ours to give? The Supreme Court has not said we have a right to die. They basically say we have a right to pull the plug and not be held by artificial means, but we don't have a right to take our own lives. In fact, if you look in Oregon, when they list the cause of death, it is a drug overdose in Oregon, not the underlying condition. And if they're really honest, they would say a physician-supplied drug overdose or something like that, that basically talks about how somebody else handed them the tool that took them. Again, these are weighty things, but I want to suggest that at the end of the day, we be real reticent about crossing this threshold. We have heard the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take. It's about promoting life. It's not about promoting death. And yes, I have family illustrations as well. My mother was diagnosed with brain cancer. She was given 6 weeks without surgery, 6 months with surgery. And she said, I'm not going to go through the expense for that. I'll take what comes. She lived about 4 years. 3.5 of those were very good. And we were blessed the day before she died for her to be very lucid because she had lost her memory. About 6 months before that, the tumor was pressing on an area that affected memory. But the day before, she was able to call us all by name, explain personal experiences, and it was a real blessing. Now, if she had taken a pill sometime before to not be a burden on us, we would have been denied that very life-giving, inspiring ability that she embraced dying. She embraced it, and she faced it. I had a brother. You all met him on the floor if you were here just a few years ago. He introduced him. He had brain cancer as well, different stream than my mom did. He was given 2 years to live when he was diagnosed. He had surgery, took some experimental drugs, lived 2.5 years. There again, he was able to take the time, and it was depressing. He went through some pretty tough times during that. But he was also able to punch out some points on the bucket list of life that we all sort of have but never quite get around to it. And except for the last little bit, it was a tough time for him. And I spent some of that time with him, but never once did he say, hey, put me out of my misery. And so I do think that how we embrace death says something to us, not just as a person or as a people, but as a society as well. I think we want to keep our medical professionals looking out for our best interests. We don't require that they get a psychiatric evaluation, but those things that I read from Oregon, the reasons why that they listed for wanting to have this assistance into the afterlife, those accompany clinical depression. But only 5.5% of these patients were sent to a psychiatrist for a diagnosis. Now, this bill is permissive. If somebody sees it, they can send it, but what regular physician deals with this every day? Psychiatrists do, and perhaps that's a waypoint that we ought to have that would give one other level of security. I don't think I could support it even then, but it at least would allow a mental professional to evaluate whether this is something that is temporary or not. One thing I can tell you, we have all made decisions in our lives that we have later regretted. This is the decision you don't walk away from. You get no redos. whether they're young and their brains are incapable of making those decisions, as we have talked about in other bills, or they're older and they just, had temporary depression. This is a path you don't come back from, and I think it's wrong, and I urge a no vote.